legal counsel informs me that
Today's news conference concerned testimony given before a Senate subcommittee hearing in Washington last week. 4 teenagers who say they were abused while living in state-run institutions have given the subcommittee sworn statements outlining the alleged abuses. One of the most serious incidents involves a 15-year-old youngster whose arm was allegedly broken last March when 2 security guards carried him from a TV room back to his dormitory room. The security guards were fired 10 months later.
On this case with, you just referred to this alleged broken arm incident with Mike E., when did this allegedly occur?
It occurred on 5th day of March, 1981.
When were the 2 employees involved in this incident terminated?
The 2 employees were not terminated until 1/1982, but there was not sufficient evidence at the time, and it was not done until there was corroborating evidence that perhaps they had engaged in inappropriate handling of students. And there were a number of complaints in regard to these employees which were investigated.
The Human Services spokesman will continue their daily news conferences tomorrow. They'll answer questions about other allegations which appeared in a series of published reports last week. Scott Wallace, Action 4 at the State Department of Human Services.
For 3 years, private vehicles in the state of Oklahoma have had staggered registration for license plates, but commercial vehicles have expired in December as usual. It's the new year, and for commercial vehicles, 1982 license plate stickers are past due. January was given as a grace period, but starting this month, penalties are being given for stickers that have not been renewed. March 3rd marks the date for an even greater sticker fine. The normal license fee will be doubled if not renewed before that date. Those vehicles in this registration period include all types that use commercial licenses plus miscellaneous tags. There are 22 tag agents in the Oklahoma City area that can issue the stickers, and they can be located in the yellow pages under tag agencies. Sticker renewals are important, but as Casey Jones points out, they're often overlooked by mistake.
This staggering system, I imagine, has a lot of people confused. That has been in effect now for 3 years, but still, they're confused, and really, it'll take a little while, but it will be all right when they finally wake up. But they have to look at their tag and see that their tag is due by the sticker that's on there, the month and all.
So if you've been putting off getting a new sticker, you have only 2 weeks left before it will cost you twice as much. Carol Lambert, Action 4.
Like the previous sessions, a Welfare Department spokesman began today's briefing with profiles of a handful of abuse incidents publicized by the press last week. In most of the cases, the department's files show some type of employee action was taken on the complaints. But perhaps the most interesting statistic revealed today involved the number of substantiated cases of child abuse by institution employees.
We have 74 substantiated cases in where a staff member has in some way abused a child.
Over a 3.5-year period.
This averages out about 21 a year. And of course, if you divide it out amongst all the number of children over all the campuses, I think you'll realize that it may not be as big as it's been blown up to be.
Reporters have asked to look at an internal audit of records at the Helena State School. There have been some complaints. The audit suggests some personnel records are missing at Helena. Department officials promised to discuss those allegations at tomorrow's session. Scott Wallace, Action 4.
Shortly before 4 this morning, firemen responded to a fire at the Texas Lounge at 28th and Southwestern. Fire officials said the blaze had been smoldering for some time before they arrived. The bar was filled with thick black smoke as firemen tried to extinguish the blaze. Most of the damage was to the front of the building and the attic. The cause of this blaze was an open-flamed heater, which was placed too close to a wooden post inside the building. No one was injured in the blaze. The bar had closed just hours before the building caught on fire. A damage estimate of the burned establishment has not yet been determined. Debbie Mash, Action 4 AM.
Earlier this week, U.S. Senator Don Nickles completed his inspection of the state's juvenile institutions with a stop at the Whitaker home in Pryor. The senator spoke with administrators and students at the school. But after the visit, at least 4 students claimed that school employees had warned them not to talk with the senator or to reporters. 2 boys claimed they were spanked by a teacher because they threatened to talk to the media. At today's news conference, department officials gave their version of what happened.
At this point, we know that one of these children did receive a spanking in school that day. It had nothing to do with the visit of the senator. And as we've talked before, corporal punishment is allowed in the school. The superintendent says that this one child, because of an incident at school, was given the option of either writing a theme or corporal punishment, and that this child chose corporal punishment.
Reporters have asked to see copies of an internal audit which supposedly showed that some important files were missing at the Helena State School for Boys. However, today the department formally declined to show that audit to the media. More on that subject tonight at 10. Scott Wallace, Action 4 at the State Department of Human Services.
The object of this souped-up sport is to pull a 50,000-pound sled 250 feet. In the beginning, you used tractors, but tonight it was trucks, all kinds of trucks, with giant engines and giant tires, driven by men with giant hopes of winning first place. This is Bud Jaskey. He came all the way from Wisconsin to compete tonight. His gear in this sport is a 1975 International, with a few minor modifications totaling over $40,000. Last week, Bud was in Dallas, where he took all the money home with him. But will Oklahoma City be as lucrative?
Oh, it could have been better. We didn't get quite as much traction as we should have. I think we had too much air in the tires. You try to guess, you try to look at the track before you pull and guess at it, but it's still guessing. You don't know until you really do it, and you don't get any practice runs to try. You just get out there and either do it or don't.
Bud and all the other pullers will get to try again Saturday and Sunday night. That gives you 2 more chances to see the tractor truck pull at the Fairgrounds Arena. Sherry Sellers, Action 4.
Cut me down to $2 at a stop. So I stop at 10 places, I pick up $20 worth of pennies. All went out and bought silver dollars. You remember those cartwheels? Remember, if you don't know your rights, you watch. If taxes are not eating at you, it's because they're feeding you. I'm feeding one of them. Sure, you got, because we are going to. Well, if you don't know your rights, what? You don't have any, right. And as long as you don't know them, the IRS is happy. They want to keep you fat, dumb, and happy. They don't want you to know your rights. Because the minute you do, you no longer are afraid of them. Now what you got to do is get through to some of these IRS agents. Can you imagine age 28 putting down on a home $130,000?
Good morning, this is Contact.
That phrase has been repeated 100,000 times to troubled Oklahomans who have called the Contact Hotline during the past decade. 24 hours a day, the volunteer crisis counselors listen to people's problems and help seek solutions.
Well, what I might be most helpful with is just kind of helping you think through things and figure out what would make sense for you. I can't really tell you, what would be best. But that's one thing you're thinking of so far is running away.
1/10 of a million people who have been troubled, lonely, plagued with doubts, or filled with anger have called Contact. Counselors say one reason for the success has been the hotline's policy of strict confidentiality.
We offer anonymity to both our callers and our phone workers. So when someone calls Contact, we don't care who they are. We don't ask them for their name. Our phone workers go by the same principle. We all use a first name here on the phones, so somebody calling doesn't know who they're talking to, and our telephone volunteer knows the person doesn't know who they're talking to. I think that has the effect of having giving a lot of freedom to the call. The people are a lot more able to say whatever they want to say.
If you would like to speak with someone about a problem, call Contact at 848-CARE. Counselors are ready to handle their next 100,000 calls. Scott Wallace, Action 4. Last week, the Gannett News Service charged that Department of Human Services boss Lloyd Rader kept track of favors done for certain state legislators through a political patronage file. In a series of news conferences last week, department spokesman denied knowledge of the existence of such a file.
There is no such a thing as a patronage file that I know of in the agency.
But this morning, Rader's assistant George Miller found the file in question. Miller says the legislative control file was used to keep track of inquiries from state legislators. He says the senators and representatives would routinely write the department's personnel office to check on a constituent's job application. As such, Miller says the book was definitely not used for political patronage.
Patronage, as I define it, would be hiring people regardless of merit. And as you can see here, that many of these entries here, we did not respond in that manner. We just simply said this person isn't qualified, there's no opening, there's no vacancy, maybe you better go to that office and be interviewed. Many times a person will apply and they're told with the county office, yeah, we requisitioned you and the paperwork hasn't come through, and that will generate an inquiry from a legislator as to what the deal is. And that's one of the things that this secretary does, is to find out, what's the holdup on the paperwork, and that will generate an entry in this log.
Miller says the Personnel Department will keep its legislative control file, but today the book got a bureaucratic name change. It's now called a correspondence log. Scott Wallace, Action 4 at the State Department of Human Services.
Word has already reached many bars about raising the minimum age for buying 3.2 beer from 18 to 19 years old in Oklahoma. The measure is supposed to help reduce alcohol-related traffic accidents involving 18-year-olds. Beer drinking is a common pastime for many college students who feel raising the minimum age is a bad proposal. State legislators say drinking any type of alcoholic beverage requires a certain amount of maturity. But for some of the people the bill would affect if passed, they say 1 year will not make a big difference.
Well, I don't agree with that to the extent that just because you're 18 and you go out and drink beer, that you're going to be more likely to get into a car accident as opposed to somebody else. I think that you're going to go out and drink it anyway.
It's like a forbidden fruit. 18-year-olds just dive into it, and if it wasn't such a taboo, they wouldn't. It would just be a socially accepted behavior, and they'd be drinking socially instead of going out to get drunk.
If people at the age of 18 are old enough to vote, to be considered adults, and old enough to get drafted, then they should be old enough to at least drink 3.2 beer.
Many of the teenagers we talk with today say the bill is well intended, but if it became law, it would be hard to enforce. They say because of identification problems. Here's an example. How many times have you went in a store and bought beer at 16 and not asked for any identification, but at 18 or 19, ID was required? Something for state lawmakers to think about. Ed Stewart, Action 4 in Norman.
Ethel Adamson is a file supervisor for the Department of Human Services. Several years ago, when her husband left her with 7 kids, someone else was working on her welfare case. Ethel joined the Welfare Employment Program, a voluntary program that places welfare recipients into jobs where they can learn a skill and become employable. Oklahoma has a model program. Last year, around 70% of the people learning a skill left the welfare rolls for full-time work. Ethel thinks they are special people.
It takes initiative. You have to want to get ahead, true enough, because now with the little money that you get starting out with WEP, it's just $5 a day. It was when I started. I don't know what it is now, but they were just giving you $5 a day, and that wouldn't even cover your car fare now. So you have to want to get ahead, you know, but it's a good opportunity if you venture into it, and I do recommend it for those that are on the FDC, you know, if they want to try to get ahead.
A bill that recently passed the state Senate would make the welfare employment program mandatory for every case where it's appropriate. Welfare officials can't guarantee the same success that Ethel has had, but they do hope for a success rate of over 50%. Charles Schnitzer, Action 4.
Import crises. It was agriculture that gave us a chance to, at least that will continue to be the case in the future.
However, if we're going to try to move this economy forward, it's what I said in the letter to the President last week, that they should go to the Camp David, have the summit, not come off of there, that mountain, unless they come down with a budget that has reduced those deficits. Reducing those deficits, because the size of deficits that are projected now by the private economists will absorb 50 and 60% of the available credit just to underwrite the red ink of the federal government.
The fact that land values slid, farmers were driven out of business, had a tremendous impact.
This growth in political action committees has got to be limited. We've got to focus in putting the individual and those individual contributions back in perspective. Because if we remember the basic words of the Constitution of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, unless we begin to put the limits and ceilings on political action committee money being contributed, we're going to see very simply that we're going to have a government of the special interest, by the special interest, and for the special interest.
The Honorable George Nigh.
But I am appreciative of this. I know how high you carry the honor, so that is meaningful to me. I appreciate in the past your recognition of my efforts on tourism when you gave me a Tourism Promotion Award of the Year. This is very meaningful to me. And I would say just simply that I am very grateful and appreciative.
A final trip to the funeral home is inevitable for everyone, so you don't have to worry about the if, just when and how much. State law provides for a plan that can help with the how much part. It's called a prepaid funeral. You fork over the money for your funeral to a mortuary before you die, and they put it in a savings account where it draws interest as a hedge against rising costs due to inflation. The plan has existed for about 10 years, but one funeral home director says it still isn't very popular.
And the reason they don't, I think, is because it's a matter of facing reality. By sitting down and writing out their instructions or pre-planning the situation or going to the extent of possibly prepaying for it, they're facing reality in a very direct way in regard to death, their own death.
Kernke says it is a good idea to prepay since cost of funerals rise and the interest paid on the account can make up for some of it. But he also says he doesn't expect people's attitude toward facing their final expense to change. Ted Brown, Action 4.
Before any income tax form can be filed, it must be filled out properly. Unfortunately, most people spend only a couple of hours preparing them. Most people do their own taxes. In fact, 60% of Americans are so-called do-it-yourselfers. Of course, professional tax preparers would like to change that statistic. One of those is Stan Jensen of H&R Block in Kansas City. He says people are running into a lot of trouble with this year's form.
Tax table's been changed. And unfortunately, people doing that approach go to the tax tables too soon. And you can wind up with cardiac arrest because it's going to look like you actually owe more taxes than you did last year. The problem is that you have to do certain computations. You have to multiply your exemptions times $1,000 and subtract that from your taxable income before you go to the tax table. Then it comes out even, and you find out that, yes, you did get a tax break, probably around $20 or $30 over what you paid last year.
If you could give some advice for those people just receiving their returns and going about the process of filling them out, what would it be?
Accurate record keeping can help you prepare a tax return that's going to save you money. But people don't want to do that. They feel that record keeping is an odious task. They don't want to buy that four-drawer file cabinet. But the truth of the matter is that the average family can keep all of its tax records probably in a large envelope. And the simpler you make the system, the more likely you're going to follow it. Don't get complicated.
Now you may wonder, after all this advice, what chances you have of being audited by the IRS. Mr. Jensen says odds are 65 to 1 against it. Of course, your odds increase if you're wealthy. But one shouldn't be worrying about audits now. One should be worrying about meeting that April 15th deadline. Bella Shaw, Action 4.
Well, we have something in mind for the public, but not a very interesting start. And as I look at the facilities we hold today and compare them with where we began, it really is a contrast. It's also a contrast in the weapon systems that we repair and overhaul here at Tinker. When you think of those early C-47s that were built in great numbers in this building where we now sit during the Second War, and later the early bombers that came here to be modified for the Second War, the B-17s, the B-24s, and the B-29s. And then as we entered the jet age with the early bombers that we modified, and you think of those in terms of what we're about to receive in the form of the B-1 bomber, there's such a change in technology. We comprehend and understand mechanical things that, in my mind, that's the
So somehow there's no justice in life sometimes. So Melissa is at home, probably watching fantasy. Let me quickly introduce you to them for the first time. Contestant number 6, Jerry Day Tipton. Ladies who could easily represent the city of Oklahoma. And contestant number 10, Nancy, probably watching Fantasy Island or something, saying, I can't believe I got the chicken pox. So our heart goes out to her tonight. In the meantime,
Watch the door.
Okay, just a minute.
Turn around. Back this way. Be careful.
It is necessary at times to protect the child or another child or the attendant to take some action to restrain them. And I certainly have no complaints. I've seen my daughter restrained. When she gets mad, she can be something else. But I am tickled to death with the care she's receiving.
And you don't believe that there's widespread abuse there?
Absolutely not. I think it's a hatchet job.
Convicted killer Harold Behrens was in Oklahoma District Court today before a 3-judge panel headed by Judge Joe Cannon. Behrens had been confined at a federal prison that only federal officials were aware of. But Judge Cannon, who sentenced Behrens to life in the Oklahoma State prison system, never authorized Behrens to be transferred out. Behrens was convicted of hiring a hitman to kill 3 people at an Oklahoma City motel in July of 1980. And he has since been a witness for the federal government. Judge Cannon insisted federal officials had no business taking him out of the state without coming to him at first.
You can't have United States attorneys signing writs to take people out of penitentiaries, Mr. Meacham. Or federal magistrates. Our magistrates can't even let them out. So I think you ought to, Mr. Meacham, ought to take another look at your program down there about who can writ people out of your penitentiary.
Attorneys for Behrens called Oklahoma Corrections Director Larry Meacham to the witness stand. Meacham told the court that since Behrens was a former police officer and also considered a snitch, Behrens' life was in danger at a state prison.
It is my belief at this time that things have changed to the point where Mr. Behrens in our system probably is a dead man.
Assistant U.S. Attorney Jim Robinson was next to take the stand. When asked by Judge Charles Owens what interest does the federal government have in Behrens, Robinson would not answer, which prompted Judge Cannon to take action against the attorney.
Answer the question. I'm going to have the sheriff behind you take you to jail, one or the other.
Based upon the statement of Mr. Griffith, Your Honor, I decline to answer that question.
Sheriff, take him into custody, put him in the county jail, and when you can tell me when you're ready to answer the question, I'll have you brought back to this court.
After a brief stay in the county jail, Robinson came back to court and answered the judge's question, at which time the contempt of court charge was dropped. Judge Cannon then ordered Behrens be placed back in the custody of the Oklahoma Corrections Department. Cannon says while Behrens' life may be in danger in the state prison system, he was not overly concerned about protecting a convicted killer.
He does that. Why can't he go down to the penitentiary, Mr. Meacham, and just take his chances like everybody else? Why can't he just get into the system. He knew what the system was. He's an ex-cop. He's a bad cop.
Behrens was taken away without ever telling the court what he thought about being sent back to a state prison. Judge Cannon did say a request can be made later to transfer Behrens if officials felt it absolutely necessary. Ed Stewart, Action for the Oklahoma County Courthouse.